things. Okay, let's get to our
Let's
guest.
get to our guest.
We've kept him waiting long enough. He is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Ukrainian Bar Association. Victor Rud, welcome back.
Victor Rud!
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Okay, that's good. That's
A little warmer perhaps than where you're at, but it's okay.
We're trying to get to the. Do you have any thoughts about what we've covered so far in the show, or you want to just get to the other stuff?
I think it's pretty funny.
Oh, okay, good. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It's a different take on on a discussion like this from your typical chat show. So I enjoyed it.
Good.
Nice. Good.
Good. Now, just for background for people watching not familiar, I've learned an awful lot from you about Ukraine, going back to before the invasion. Even I had you on my podcast years ago now, and you went through this whole kind of historical overview for me based on things that you've been writing for years, and really crystallized my understanding of especially the Russia-Ukraine relationship, which has been completely misunderstood in the West, and especially in Washington by presidents of both parties and all that.
Mhm.
So we don't have time to go into all of this now, but are there any key points that you think that people should know, who are new to this, new to the history? What are some of the key takeaways that people should know?
Well, probably the predicate point is that this Ukraine was always a part of Russia syndrome. It's so deeply embedded in our educational system. That's simply not the case. I'm not going to go into the reasons for it. There's obviously a long history, but if anybody doesn't question that seeming equivalence because of obviously 11 years of war now by Russia against Ukraine, then their ability to understand anything further, I think, is going to be very, very limited. And just in a nutshell, the fundamental point now in this war and the reason for the invasion is not a territorial dispute. Russia, as we know, is the largest country in the world. Ukraine is a big country. Actually, it's the biggest country in Europe. But it's about 0.02 or 0.07% of entire Russian territory. So that's not the point. And the point is actually the dichotomy between the two nations, opposite ends of the spectrum. So much so that when the Soviet Union was starting to disintegrate, the final coup de grace, the stake in the heart, so to speak, that ensured the disintegration of the USSR was Ukraine's renewed assertion of independence. And that was it. That caved the USSR. It could not exist without Ukraine as an integral part. And the reason for that is not so much its resources, both agricultural, as we know, I mean, you're talking about farmers, Stephanie, but also the minerals and the like, which were one of the reasons for Hitler's war in Europe, which was to conquer, occupy, and colonize Ukraine, partially for the grain, but in large measure also because of its minerals. But the cause of the animosity and a history of genocidal policies by Russia against Ukraine is that Ukraine represents the democratic bacillus right next door on Russia's border, and that Putin and the predecessors were very much concerned would infect the body politic.
Would spread the
idea
of freedom.
The influence
Yeah.
would eventually spread.
Right.
And I'm not going to go into ancient history, but just as a couple of examples, I don't know if I raised this before, Greg, in my prior talks. We all heard about the three branches of government, checks and balances, separation of church and state, and the sanctity of contract. Sounds like the U.S. Constitution. Well, it was Ukraine's. It was the first democratic constitution in Europe 77 years before Philadelphia.
Mm.
We've heard of the Magna Carta, right? Prince John, forced by the nobles in the 1200s, which established the basis for our concept of right and wrong, Bill of Rights, the legal system, and the whole Anglo-Saxon tradition forced upon King John. Well, 200 years before that, in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, the ruler voluntarily, without any pressure of his own initiative, generated what I'll call the Ukrainian equivalent of the Magna Carta, abolishing the death penalty, limiting his own rights, granting equal rights and obligations on women. So, Russia's claim of 1,000-year history and all of that, well, then where did all of this tradition, manifest itself in Russian history? And it never has. Russia's society is vertical, Ukraine's is horizontal. And that's one of the handicaps Ukrainians always had, because there's a tremendous distrust of authority. They can't deal with it, they can't put it up with it, and you have constant revolutions against central control. And that is the problem that Russia cannot tolerate. And actually, to the extent this is a so-called territorial dispute, again, it is not. But territory is important not for the land so much. Russia has more than enough of it. It is the people on the land. You got to get the land to get rid of the people, kill the children, kidnap the kids, turn them into little Russian automatons as cannon fodder for future wars. And the purpose is to destroy the Russian state, and to the extent necessary, to physically eliminate the Ukrainian population. It's happened in the past. Millions and millions have been killed.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where we're at.